So very warm welcome, everyone, to this session of our lecture series, Peace Through Dialogue. I see among the participants that we range from the US, among Central Europe, to Cyprus, Armenia, and probably far beyond. So I want to welcome everyone around the globe who's joining us tonight. Today's lecture will be given by colleagues from the Herbert Kellman Institute. And as you already know, if you followed the first sessions of this lecture series, this lecture series is a cooperation between the University of Graz, the Herbert Kellman Institute in Vienna, and the University of Denver. And today we want to focus on the work done by the Herbert Kellman Institute in Vienna. And all of the colleagues who are going to present tonight have a vast experience in conflict transformation, and they will not only provide us with theoretical conceptions and lessons from their work, but also with very practical insights to their work in conflict areas such as Sri Lanka, Israel, Palestine, or the Alps-Adriatic region. So this session will also be a bridge between the last one, where we particularly focused on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and the next one, where we will focus more on Central Europe. So I would just like to shortly introduce our speakers who will provide much more insights into their experience when they give their presentations. So our first speakers will be Wilfried Graf and Gudrun Kramer. Both are co-directors of the Herbert C. Kellman Institute for Integrative Conflict Transformation in Vienna. Wilfried studied sociology, Gudrun studied history and journalism, and for some time both were working as researchers at the Austrian Study Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution in Schleining. And together they have been engaged in various conflicts around the world and in conflict transformation processes in initiatives in Central Asia, in the South Caucasus, in Southeast Europe, in Sri Lanka, or in Israel-Palestine. And in addition, Gudrun is since 2022 also involved in regional programs to support the Western Balkan countries in their EU integration, and she's doing this for the German Society for International Cooperation. And with us tonight is also Oliver Fink. He's a research fellow at the Herbert C. Kellman Institute, and he investigates how emotions and social cognitions contribute to intergroup mediation by conducting a mixed methods field research, and he has a specific focus also on the Israeli-Palestine conflict. If you want to know further information about the lecture series, you will find it on the website. I just shared the link in the chat for all of us. Please spread this link to whoever you think is interested in the lecture series. And with this, I would like to hand the word and give the floor to Oliver, Wilfried, and Gudrun. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much, Jürgen, for this introduction. And I have to warn everybody who also listened in and participated in the first two events the last couple of weeks. Today, we are not going to present two different inputs to you. But what we would like to do, Wilfried, Oliver, and I, as we were also writing actually this article together in this publication of Tamra Person Distray, is that I will give a little bit of introduction. Then I will hand over to Oliver, who will present basically the theories that we also presented in this article. And then in the third part, Wilfried will focus a little bit on the practical work that we have been doing. I will also moderate ourselves, and basically we don't have a discussant with us today, so that means we really rely on you and your active participation afterwards, and that you are asking questions, or that you are commenting to what we said, or that you are challenging us. So I'm very much looking forward, and I hope it's going to be interactive the next 2 hours. So as Jürgen said, Wilfried and I, we founded actually the Herbert C. Kellman Institute for Interactive Conflict Transformation in 2005. At that time, it still had a different name. We renamed it in 2011. But we have been involved in conflict transformation in practical work actually since the 90s. And one of our major focus was then Sri Lanka, and we basically accompanied the peace process in Sri Lanka from 2001 to 2009. So we were engaged for 8 years in Sri Lanka on what we call track 1.5. So basically, when it is about mediation and dialogue projects, one differentiates between different tracks. Track 1 is the official track, the governmental negotiations. Track 2 would be basically that you bring together representatives of conflict parties that do have a certain influence in their societies, but are not governmental representatives. So this could be religious leaders, businessmen, journalists, university professors, and that you basically have a dialogue with them. And track 3 would be grassroots level. So this strange track 1.5, what does it mean? It basically means that you bring together governmental representatives, but also non-governmental representatives, and not in the official function, but in more informal settings. And the basic hypothesis behind is that when you invite ministers, not in their function as ministers, but in their personal capacities, that they have more freedom to think creatively. So this is what we did, and basically what Oliver is going to present to you is going to be a quite theoretical work that we are doing, but what I would like to stress is that all these theoretical considerations are really coming and originating from our practical work. Questions that we had to ask ourselves during this practical work, where we tried to find an answer through research. And Herbert Kellman was mentioned a lot already in the previous lectures, and he was also one of our inspirations and one source of inspiration for our work. And one concept that Herbert Kellman always stressed is the concept of scholar practitioner. So basically, he would engage in practical dialogue work, facilitation work, mediation work with conflict parties, and would then try to reflect on a theoretical level, what does it mean, in order to generate theories. But on the other hand, also, looking into different theories and what does this mean for our practical work. So this concept of scholar practitioner has always been very important for Herbert Kellman and is very important for us as well. So before we go into the theoretical part, I would like to just raise some questions that we had to face during our practical work that basically then fed into our theoretical work. So I said that we accompanied the peace process from 2001 to 2009. And this is something that's quite interesting, because how come that two people from Austria suddenly get involved in facilitating on an informal level, but quite high level, the peace negotiations in Sri Lanka? And basically, this was a simple coincidence. It's not something that you can plan. It's not something where you would write a project proposal and then somebody would fund you. No, it's usually by connections, the network that you are having, that people know you. So when, for example, then the government of Sri Lanka was asking the Austrian government if Austria could contribute something to support the peace process in Sri Lanka, the Austrian government asked us to get involved, and this is how we started working in Sri Lanka. But the request at that time came from the Sri Lankan government, means one conflict party. And there was no request from the other conflict party, which were at that time the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, who were fighting already for decades for an independent state on the island of Sri Lanka. So when we got involved upon invitation from one conflict party, but we didn't get a mandate from the other conflict party. So already when we started engaging, we needed to ask ourselves, what does this mean? And also, for example, where is the legitimacy for us getting involved? So when we got involved in 2001, I think for 2 years, we were only working with a group of people that were put together by the Sri Lankan government. There were representatives of the Tamil people in this group, but there were no official representative of the Liberation Tigers of Tamil. So we were basically working only with one conflict party. That meant it was not like a dialogue on the round table where you facilitate between conflict parties, but it was more like having a dialogue with one conflict party, helping them reflecting on what is going on and what are the conflict dynamics. But at the same time, we were asked, or our task was, to bring in also the concerns of the other conflict party that was not in the room. So usually when you are mediating between conflict parties, you know, it's always said in literature, a mediator has to be neutral. That means a mediator is not taking sides, or is at least all partial. So to be honest, working in these conflict settings, in highly escalated conflict settings where people die, where people are killed, where you do see gross human rights violations every day, it's very difficult to remain neutral. It's very difficult to remain objective. And when you are honest with yourself, you all to support one conflict party probably more than another conflict party. So all this needs to be reflected. What does this mean for me as a mediator, for a dialogue practitioner? So we were dealing a lot with this question of legitimacy, with this question of neutrality, and also who are we actually as Westerners coming to a different culture? Who are we that we think we can contribute even to the resolution of their conflicts? Yeah. And when we started working, beginning of the 2000s, I would say at that time, the liberal peace paradigm was dominant in our field. Liberal peace paradigm means that at that time, a lot of people thought that by bringing democracy and bringing rule of law to a country would also help to resolve the conflict. So basically today one would say it was quite a colonial approach at that time. It was not culturally sensitive. But I think when we were working in Sri Lanka, we became pretty fast, it became evident that if we want to find a solution to this conflict, it needs to be a solution that is somehow embedded in the Sri Lankan culture. So what does it mean to mediate a dialogue in a cultural sensitive way? What does it mean to deal with power asymmetries when you have one conflict party that has full power and another conflict party that is actually marginalized, that is occupied, that is disintegrated? So how do we deal with this power asymmetry in a conflict? Can we ignore it when having a dialogue? Can we bring it into a dialogue? How to bring it into a dialogue? So there were so many questions for us that really basically encouraged us to reflect on a theoretical level. So what became evident also pretty fast for us is that actually peace and conflict transformation is something that is very transdisciplinary. Yeah. And if you look at peace studies, and even today, I would say that there are actually two studies dominating peace and conflict studies. First one is international relations. Usually when it is about international relations, it's a lot about balance of power and trying to resolve conflicts by balance of power. And the second dominant studies, I would say, is law. And then it is about trying to achieve conflict resolution through the rule of law. Our practical engagement has shown that this is not enough, and that it needs many more insights. And this is also why we were drawn a lot to the work of Herbert Kellman, because he was a psychologist. He was focusing on social psychology. And when we look at these highly escalated conflict escalations, one has to realize that they are always very irrational. Conflict parties don't act in a rational way. They often act very irrational, and conflicts are driven by emotions. So this is why, for example, social psychology and psychology is equally important, but also, as I said, cultural studies are also equally important. I said cultural sensitivity is very important, and I would even like to go beyond. I think it's very important to reflect their own worldview. What do we consider as right, and what do we consider as wrong? And to reflect upon this is something that is very basic when working in these conflict constellations. So I think this is what I would like to say at the very beginning, just for you to somehow show that all the questions that came up during our practical work are somehow the basis for this highly theoretical article that we finally produced last year or 2 years ago. And Wilfried will come back after Oliver's input and will tell you a little bit more about our practical work. So having said all this, Oliver, I would hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gudrun, for this brilliant introduction, giving you a case study on how this meta-theoretical approach developed, and B, through the questions that Gudrun and Wilfried, were facing, already laid the groundwork why it is so relevant and so important to come up with a meta-theoretical framework, and how and why theory is so relevant and so important for practical issues, practical questions, praxology. And that is basically already the gist of what I want to bring across today. Let me just switch to my presentation, which I hope you can see. So, connecting meta theory and practice. The starting point for any peace practitioner is intergroup conflict, particularly intractable intergroup conflict, conflict that goes on for a long time, longer than one generation. We had a massive escalation in the Israel-Palestine conflict that is all over the media. We have a new conflict in Russia-Ukraine, where we started getting engaged recently with the Kalman Institute, but also there are other conflicts that are not in the news. It is estimated that in the Democratic Republic of Congo since the 90s when the conflict started. Over 6 million people have died. So sometimes we have like urgent settings in the media, but some of them are more hidden. And then Gudrun mentioned already, this person that we have here on the photo, Herbert Kellman, and track 2 dialogue or track 2 diplomacy as a technique, because the $1 million question, as one of my PhD advisors once framed it, is now, okay, what can we do on how to resolve these conflicts, or at least transform them? And as Gudrun said, this can happen, in different ways. But in the end, there's studies that say that about 70% of all conflicts, wars, will get solved finally through some form of negotiation, mediation, some form of dialogical interaction. And we think one of the most interesting and kind of fascinating techniques are not kind of these official, track 1, Lavrov meets Blinken, nor kind of the grassroots level, dialogue that is also important. And there are obviously interesting like combinations. Gudrun mentioned the track 1.5 level, but these classic track 2 diplomacy or interactive problem solving, as Herb Kellman called it, which is basically to some extent what this whole lecture series is about, and kind of different perspectives on this one approach or this one technique. And what I just want to mention, so track 2 diplomacy, interactive problem solving, track 2 dialogue is in a way different from classic mediation in the sense that you really, through face-to-face interaction in small group, you want to achieve personal change, and through this personal change, conflict transformation. So it's not enough if 2 conflict parties kind of grudgingly accept, some form of solution that the mediator presents, but you really want to build relationships. You really want to create a joint conflict understanding and some form of individual and social transformation that the participants then bring back to their communities and shape further. Now, since its conception, let's say in the 70s and 80s, lots of things has happened. Gudrun mentioned these changed peace building paradigms. We had an excellent talk the last time about non-negotiability, how to focus on that. There is now like a better understanding, for example, on escalation patterns, the approaches, kind of the praxeology changed, for example, through intra-group dialogue, through self-reflection. Wilfried will later on talk about inside mediators a little bit, but in our opinion, there is very, very limited meta-theoretical foundation of these praxeological approaches. So we do something, but why do we do it? And that is not a strictly theoretical question, although we have to dig into social theory to make sense of it, but it's a highly practical question because, Gudrun mentioned all these questions, about legitimacy, about neutrality in asymmetric conflict, and so on and so on. In all these questions, so to say, your own worldviews, your own concerns, ideas, non-negotiabilities in a sense, as a mediator, as a conflict facilitator, as a third party, strongly define what you aim for, what you approach, what your objectives are, your limits, and your possibilities, what you think is possible and what you think is not possible. So if you have a strong, kind of security, people are bad, groups can't change, then you will not do track 2 dialogue, or you will do it in a very limited way. So your worldviews restrict the possibilities that you see. So in a way, with our meta model, we want to extend what Offer talked last time, non-negotiabilities of the conflict parties to the, worldviews, perceptions, and in a way, non-negotiabilities of the third party. That's the gist of this talk. And the interesting thing is, in social theory, there are 2 kinds of perspectives or building blocks. So one, there is interesting general theory by, for example, Edgar Morin, complexity thinking, but also, on the critical social theory side, Roy Bhaskar. And there is a small, handful of scholars that try to apply these critical social theory approaches to international relations. So that's one side, but that's very general and not very kind of conflict dialogue specific. And then there are some very specific, maybe even too specific approaches on how to do conflict dialogue. For example, Peter Coleman promotes something that he calls systemic wisdom. Oliver Ramsbotham, whom you also heard the last time, talks about strategic engagement. Edgar Morin, complex thought, joint thinking, Nadine Rouhana. But these 2 approaches, the more generalist one and the very specific one, they so far they didn't match, they didn't go together. So especially Wilfried and Gudrun and more recently myself, we try to change that and come up with a critical social theory model for interactive problem solving, or as we call it now, interactive conflict transformation. So we wanted to come up with a framework that describes social realities of conflict in a fitting way, to have a good resource framework for conflict analysis, concerns analysis, and conflict intervention. That's what we try. The methods are with Wilfried being a sociologist, very kind of meta-theoretical and philosophical, which is for me very exciting because I come from a very different tradition. And so recently we've been trying to assess, evaluate the model with the help, for example, of natural language processing and qualitative methods. Okay, so this is the most complex and theoretical slide that I have. If you survive this one, then you're good to go. And the question here is, what is the nature of reality? Which is obviously a very complex and to some extent theoretical question. How can you describe reality, conflict reality, in a useful and succinct but non-reductionist way? And they're basically, so the slide is basically about 2 ideas. The first one is by a guy called Roy Bhaskar, a philosopher. And so he says the world is, as a general idea, the world is not completely subject to human construction. So there is a certain objective, or as he calls it, causal reality, not in a deterministic sense, as in A has to lead to B, but as tendency, A can lead to B. And to describe this interaction, he uses 3 social domains, or 3 layers that you see on this graph on the right. So the most limited one, the most basic one, are experiences, social experiences, what he calls the empirical realm. The next one has another dimension, and that includes events, social context, obviously, that shapes experiences. So it's a bit more complex. And the third one, kind of the most complete domain or layer, includes as well these generative or causal mechanisms, and that he calls the real. That's the most complete, but also the most complex way or layer or perspective to look at reality. Okay, and then kind of what do you do with these layers in which, like, let's call it domains or spheres, does this play out? And there Margaret Archer says, well, it's basically four. The sphere of the self, the sphere of agency, the sphere of interaction, different selves, different agentic agents interacting with each other, those interactions in a more static way creating structure, and those interacting over a long time gives you culture. So ta-da, here's the model. We have the four domains, the four quadrants, spheres in a way, the self in yellow, the interaction in blue, the social structure in red, the culture and worldview in green. And obviously this is a meta theory, so there's many single theories that play into this. You have, for example, on the self side, you have psychoanalysis, phenomenology, psychobiography. On the interaction side, obviously, you have like group theory, social psychology, and so on and so on. So this is based on a whole lot of, in a multidisciplinary way on different theories that are relevant for these four quadrants. Obviously, in conflict dialogue, in interactive problem solving, the relational sphere, the relational quadrant is the most obvious. This is what you can observe if you facilitate such a conflict dialogue. So this is the one in the foreground. You see either constructive or destructive interaction. You can observe strategies. You see activities in this dialogue situation, but all the other quadrants have an impact. The personal history, the culture, kind of the entrenchment of a conflict culture, and structures, oppression structures, injustice structures. So in your focus, don't oversimplify and look at the interaction only. There's much more to it that you don't necessarily directly observe. And this is not static, this is dynamic. You have conflict dynamics, unresolved cleavages, contradictions lead to more polarization on the collective level, on the individual level, leading to acts of violence, leading to more contradiction, and so on. So this is a changing pattern, and we have seen a huge escalation, spiral towards violence on October 7th in the Israel-Palestine conflict. The social fault lines that are at play are equally complex. The conflict is rare, where you can, put just like one into the spotlight. Sometimes, some are more prominent than others. But in your conflict analysis, kind of the, social settings are complex: urban, rural, north, south, gender, and so on and so on. There's plenty, but also if you go away from context and look at, intra-psychological processes, there can be plenty, and we have lots of examples in different conflicts, kind of how these cognitive versus emotional dichotomies play out. Okay, but at some point, so that was, if you will, kind of the negative side, kind of the conflict analysis side. But as a facilitator, at some point, you need to turn kind of these negative dynamics into some form of positive. And also there, you can use the model here, the example, of one of the leading questions that after looking into concerns, non-negotiabilities, worldviews, and so on, you try to steer towards possible common goals. For example, with this question, what could be a shared vision? Because also there, in the different quadrants, in the different spheres, you have supporting dynamics that I have on the far left and on the far right. So all these quadrants, they're not, even in conflict, not entirely negative. In the self-agency, in the intra-psychological domain, there's assertiveness, there's a sense of cooperation, a sense of ownership, creativity, spontaneity, and that is all stuff that you as a facilitator can harness and have tried to bring into the game in a way that maybe the conflict parties, because of their long-time conflict experiences, don't have a perspective for anymore. Now, this process of kind of finding some way ahead towards conflict transformation is not like a very systematic and logical and straightforward one. That's why I like kind of the graph on the right much more than the one on the left, that is very systematic and maybe very legal. So normally, like in praxis, this is extremely confusing and iterative and like going, 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, but not ending up at the starting point. You end somewhere else, and hopefully over time you can harness that and come to some form of even if it's an agonistic form of let's call it compromise or approach toward conflict transformation that the parties are willing to carry back to their communities. Again, in the direct workshop, in the face-to-face encounter, I hope you can see kind of the stuff on the left here. In assessing conflict transformation or track 2 dialogue, you distinguish between the direct outcome of a workshop and then the transfer that happens later. And in a way, you can also, for this distinction, use the model, where the self and agency plus the interaction quadrants are more linked to outcome, or in this perspective, you can see the outcome better. And the kind of social structure change and worldview change, that is then probably more achieved through transfer activities of the conflict parties. And we are, but maybe I stop here, just very briefly 2 slides on both of these aspects. We started evaluating the model, assessing the model, as I said, using natural language processing, looking into how self and agency change through Kalman's workshops, how interactions evolve through a workshop from Friday to Monday or over a longer time, but maybe let's stop right here. So Wilfried has time and we have time for questions. So just to summarize, Track 2 dialogue needs sound meta-theoretical foundations to fulfill its promise. These meta-theoretical foundations can be highly practical. They define limits and possibilities of dialogue activities. And as I said, we started measuring, assessing outcome changes in empathy levels, in emotional tone, and which factors in the interaction are responsible for individual social change. Thank you very much. And I hand over to Wilfried, taking it further with the looking a bit deeper now into the specific layout of such a conflict dialogue. You need to switch on your microphone.
I knew it. I will forget it. Okay. Okay. So thank you, Gudrun, and thank you, Oliver, for your inputs. After Gudrun's emphasis on deep questions coming from the field, and Oliver coming from deep theory and meta theory, I will try now to close our lecture by linking our theoretical approach to our praxeology. In our practical work, we starting a year-long process, I would say. The perspective of time is very, very important for us. We don't think that we will get quick solutions in any deep process and any deep interacted conflict, but we need years, many years to enable conflict parties to come up with solutions. But during these many years, we start also with a very practical approach. And we start with Herb Kelman's method of 6 levels of dialogue. So we start with this quite simple and logical approach of Herb about interactive problem solving. It starts with this first level of experience. We are focusing on our empirical experiences and the experiences of the representatives of the conflict parties, of course. And then we go to the second level of deeper fears, needs, and concerns. We're exploring here what for the conflict parties is, I would say, existential, quite existential, and what have to be addressed in order to find creative solutions. This is also what Oliver of Salzburg is working on with his theory of the non-negotiability. The non-negotiability lies exactly in this layer of deeper fears, needs, and concerns. On the third level, then, Herb is asking what could be a shared vision that addresses the concerns, needs, and fears of all stakeholders, of all conflict parties in a serious way, and can address them in a way that they can live with it. And the fourth level then would be analyzing obstacles. What would happen when we could try to realize this vision? What kind of obstacles we would meet on the ground? And this level is then asking from us as the facilitators to analyze, and from the conflict parties as well, to analyze jointly the underlying political, structural, cultural, psychological obstacles to this vision. And based on this conflict analysis, we can discuss and we can elaborate strategies also on these political, structural, cultural, and psychological dimensions. And then the last level would be coming to very concrete, specific actions and tasks for each participant of such work. So this was Herb's simple model, what we can find in his articles, although the real work is much more complex, and especially we had to, when we continued this work in the Middle East, we had to find out that the conditions of work, of this kind of work, changed fundamentally. While Herb could still work in the so-called pre-Oslo time with secular moderates, this doesn't work anymore now. We have to work also with hardliners and with people with non-secular and non-liberal worldviews. And this is much, much more complicated to do than to working only with secular and moderate participants of conflict groups. So in order to work with these hardliners or these illiberal worldviews, we need these meta-theories, what Oliver just mentioned to us. In order to analyze it, we need to have a framework to makes possible to analyze our own worldview and the worldviews of the conflict parties. Therefore, we need meta-theory, and we need philosophy, and we need complex social theory. That does not mean that we present the social theories to our conflict parties in face-to-face dialogues and in face-to-face work, but we have these as mental maps in our mind, in the mind of the facilitators, while the concrete work is just very, very simple listening and asking good questions. What does this mean in our praxeology? It may be also in comparing to the praxeology of Herb Kelman. Kelman was focusing on problem-solving workshops. The format of workshops was very, very important for him. A process of analysis and mutual understanding has to show up in the workshop themselves. And in our conditions, I would say we are doing workshops in Israel and Palestine, for example, every year. And we started such process also with Ukraine and Russia now. We do workshops on a yearly basis or monthly basis, but much more important is sometimes maybe what's going on between the workshops, meaning what our participants of these workshops are doing concretely in between meeting each other, in between doing some conflict analysis, what they do with politicians, with journalists, with diplomats, and so on. So I think this is a very important difference, but I think it's a very interesting approach. And I'm very thankful to Offer Salzberg, who is kind of pioneer of developing this work nowadays in the Middle East. So we don't focus so much on the workshops. We're focusing on deep work on the ground. And for this, we don't have only international facilitators or mediators. We build up inside mediators, inside facilitators, inside researchers. And by the way, we come to a structure of our intervention that we could describe in a way that we have always a kind of core group of local facilitators, local representatives of different conflict parties, and combined to some extent coordinated by international facilitators, researchers, and mediators. But the ownership is completely with the local facilitators and mediators. And therefore, this is also based on our deep complexity thinking, our complexity philosophy of Edgar Morin, that we don't have ownership in such a process anyway. So these local facilitators in our core group are bringing views somehow together. But much more important is their own work with their own constituencies, with their own conflict parties on the ground. Yeah, we have a hardliner, Rappi, in our work in Israel, Palestine, for example, who is working with us, who is talking also with Palestinians in the core group. But he is working a lot separately with many different rabbis in his network. They don't meet. They don't come together. They don't meet each other. But the representative of the core group is working with them in a year-long process. I think this is the most important thing I would like to add to the questions of Gudrun and to the input of Oliver. And I think I can leave it here, and I'm looking forward very much to your questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oliver and Wilfried. And let me just summarize. Basically, the meta-theoretical framework that we developed and what you can read in the article in more detail is there in order to reflect the worldviews, to reflect our own worldview, in order to ask ourselves not only are we doing the right thing, but asking ourselves, why do we think that we do the right thing? So really questioning it. But it's also important in order to understand the worldview of our conflict parties, views of our conflict parties. Then the whole social theory, and then broken down to the conflict theory, is for us somehow a mental map that helps us to interpret the information that we gather from the dialogues, from the conflict parties, in order to analyze what they tell us, in order to understand, in order to have a complex understanding of the whole situation, in order, and this is important, just in order to be able to ask again useful questions to our conflict parties that would help them to extend their understanding and their perspectives. So basically, the whole theory that is laid out in this article is simply in our head in order to analyze, interpret for ourselves, and to ask the next question. And the practical and the praxeology is there really in order to facilitate the dialogue, to have a little bit of a structure of a dialogue. Although what is very important is that none of this is linear, also not these 6 steps that Wilfried presented. Once you are in a dialogue with conflict parties, you jump from there to there and there, but to have these, I would say, mind maps and these structures for yourself in your brain is very useful in order to not lose yourself in the whole complexity of conflict constellation. So I would like to leave it here. I think we talked for 1 hour. That's exactly what we wanted to do. And we wanted to keep actually the other hour for you. I don't want to push you, but encourage you that you also can turn on your cameras. Would be nice to see you, not only ourselves. And of course, we are very curious about your questions, comments. Yeah, and the floor would be open to your questions. And usually it always needs somebody to break the ice. So who dares? Huh? Maydeen? That's correct?
Yes, Maydeen.
Maydeen, nice meeting. Hi.
Thank you very much. I have a question. You have mentioned that when we are invited to mediate in a conflict, we should be neutral. But we know every one of us has like kind of PAs and prejudices or something like that influenced from the society, from social system, from education system, and so on. So how could be neutral and to have this function as immediate in a conflict, although there is this kind of prejudices and so on? For me, I don't think it's easy to get rid of this, because it's not something like clothes to take them off or so. What do you think about that?
Well, I can start giving an answer. So basically, this is also our experience. If you are honest to yourself, you can't be neutral, and you can't be a neutral mediator. You can pretend to be neutral, but that doesn't mean that even on an unconscious level, you know, your own worldview would interfere with the way how you steer the dialogue. And this is why it's so super important for us, you know, to reflect our own worldviews, yeah, to basically be radically honest with yourself when you feel basically attracted to one position more than to another position, yeah. By reflecting this, you can already correct it a little bit. You are cautious, you are more attentive to what you are doing yourself. What is also very helpful is when you don't facilitate alone, but when you are facilitating, for example, in a pair. So if you have two facilitators, it helps a lot during breaks to reflect, yeah. What is important is to reflect your own emotions, yeah. What did trigger you in a dialogue, yeah? What did not trigger you? Where did you feel emotions? All this gives you hints, yeah. And based on this, you really can try to basically cultivate an attitude of all partiality, which is never possible, but you try to do it, yeah. So but this question of neutrality, you know, is extending. It even goes beyond, yeah. Because, for example, also what you find in literature is always, when you are neutral as a mediator, as a facilitator, you know, the resolution or the solutions to the conflict need to come from the conflict parties themselves. Yeah, there are a lot of good points why this is a good argument, because definitely ownership is super important. Yeah. And when the conflict parties themselves develop a solution, they have the ownership, yeah? On the other hand, when you are sitting there as a facilitator, and I give you now, I don't know, just one hypothetical scenario. Imagine that national religious Israelis and Hamas would sit together and they would agree on a certain solution, but this solution would discriminate the women in the societies. Okay. So how do I react as a liberal woman, yeah, Western woman? Do I accept such a solution because it comes from the conflict parties themselves? They negotiated it, they agree to it, yeah. What do I do as a facilitator in such a situation? Yeah. So all these are really very important questions that you constantly have to reflect. Yeah. And this is why also Herbert Kellman's approach was very appealing for us, because basically Kellman's approach is a needs-based approach. Yeah. So he's really focusing on fears, concerns, but needs and basic needs. Yeah. So, so our understanding is that just the same in which culture we got socialized to, where just the same where we are born, we as human species have something in common, and this is what we would call basic needs. This is a highly contested theory as well. There are hundreds of different basic needs theories out in literature, and Wilfried studied a lot of them. Yeah, and I don't go into our basic needs theory that we have today, which is connected to this non-negotiable non-negotiability of what to offer, was further developing it basically. But for us, still one of these anchors would be that basic needs of all stakeholders need to be fulfilled, whatever it means, yeah, in order to support a certain solution. And these basic needs need to be explored in a dialogue constantly. And we talk about conflict transformation and not conflict resolution because we think it's a constant ongoing work. You don't resolve a conflict and then you've got peace and your job is done. No, it needs a constant transformation of conflict, of issues, of relationships, yeah, and in order to aim towards the fulfillment of basic needs for everybody. Full stop here. I don't know if others want to, Wilfried, you want to add something, or shall we go on? I shouldn't answer, I should moderate. I'm very sorry for this. Next time I hand over to you.
I think we should go on. There is a question of Berit, for example.
I see Berit here. Hi.
I'm Berit from the student group from Max Lakic. I really find this very, very interesting, also the theoretical approaches that you presented. But I found really, Gudrun, your example with the women very intriguing. So how actually would you react in real life then on such a matter? So if you really know that doesn't work out, if you, and I imagine that it's not a made-up example, it's possible. So if we go to Afghanistan, for example, the women have really a hard time. So I guess that might be a real problem. How would you react to such a suggestion?
Yeah, look, I mean, you just mentioned Afghanistan, yeah? On one hand, yeah, I as a liberal woman, I say, I don't think this is right, how women are treated there. At the same time, I'm told I need to be cultural sensitive. Yeah, I'm not allowed to bring in my liberal Western values. Yeah, so how do I deal with these things? And to be honest, I don't have an answer. I only can give you one example that I thought was interesting. I was really very young. I was still a student. I was traveling, and I went to New Guinea. Yeah, and in New Guinea, I went trekking, and I was fascinated. You know, I wanted to get away from civilization or Western blah blah as far as possible. And we spent a couple of weeks with a tribe there, natural tribe. And they had this tradition, and it was a very old tradition, that whenever a man in the family passes away, the women would cut, you know, this part of the finger, the fingertip, in order to show the loss. So if you're unlucky and you have a lot of men in your family passing away, you know, you found really women that would have all their fingertips cut. Yeah. And the women would not question it originally, would not question it because it's part of the tradition. But when you start a dialogue with them and you ask them, you know, you know, how this works and all this, they would tell you really these stories, how this hurts and how horrible it is, and that they can't use their fingers properly anymore and all that, you know. And then when you have a situation like this, you can ask, would there be or could there be another way to express the love? Yeah. Do you really need to cut the fingertip in order to express the loss? Yeah. So it's not really answering your question, but I mean, you know, it's a constant search, and there are no ready answers to all these things. It's very complex.
No, but I think it kind of does, because also it was mentioned that the in-between talks, so not the official negotiations are often the most important, but the in-between. So maybe kind of a lobbying or bringing that in the in-between talks then as well to the table would probably work out, like saying, okay, this is the suggestion, but what about, do you think of women?
Yeah. And in any society, you find people that are questioning their own collective worldviews.
There is not always only one person on this negotiation table, I guess. So if you say you have also people being in the society, it might, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Werner.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I liked it very much, and especially I liked that you insist on the role of theory for understanding and guiding your practice. I think it's really important to say this. So my question is how this theoretical background helps you to get started, because it is not always like this, Gudrun, as you told us, that somebody's coming to you and say, let's start a contact and let's start discussion. We have, for instance, this war in Ukraine, where even mediators from Ukraine say there is no chance for any discussion with the other side, and maybe many people on the Russian side as well. So as soon as a relevant group of each party is ready to get involved in a debate, this is half of the victory in some way. But how to do this, and what did you learn in your processes to start, because intractable conflict starts with a statement that there is no chance to discuss with each other. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Werner. Wilfried, do you want to answer this question?
Yeah, maybe yes, because concretely, I have this problem with a dialogue process between Ukraine and Russia. In the Ukraine, you have a quite well-educated community of mediators. They were educated the last 20 years, partly from the West, and they are learned mediators. They know what we talk about, but they are saying we don't accept at the moment any dialogue with the Russian side, and they do this in a quite aggressive way as well. So at the moment, it's not possible to bring together Russians and Ukrainians in such a kind of dialogue. What do? You try to find at least someone of one conflict party, at least of one conflict party who is ready to start. I found a very interesting Russian psychotherapist who is just willing to work to build up a dialogue process. And she's also a mediator. She knows a lot of Ukrainian mediators as well. She's now excluded from this process of dialogue with the Ukrainians, but still there are ongoing relationships between them because of their history of dialogues before. And so we work, Oliver is, maybe he can add something. He's also working in this core group. We have a core group. We started to come up with such a core group where we have at least a very interesting Russian facilitator who is willing to build up such a process. Ukrainians will come. after 1 year, we could, at least now we can see maybe a different attitude to this question of dialogue. I have the feeling something is changing on the ground on the level of Ukrainian mediators, and I'm quite optimistic that, let's say, in another year or in 2 years or in 50 years, we will have this dialogue. So you start with somebody who is willing to do it, and you just start.
But may I add something here, because I said in the beginning that we were invited by the Sri Lankan government. And, you know, in the beginning, when we started working, we thought we need to have access also to the liberation tigers of Tamil. It's because otherwise we cannot work. So we tried to approach these Tamil tigers, and it was quite interesting because what they answered was basically, we are sorry, there are official negotiations going on. The mediator at that time was the government of Norway. We don't need another mediator because we have the Norwegians. We need basically advisors. But as you are advising already the Sri Lankan government, you cannot be advisors for us. So we said, okay, that's a fair point. So we keep working basically with the society from the south of Sri Lanka. And what we did is we facilitated a dialogue and tried really in this dialogue to elaborate and to come up with recommendations for the peace process that would also take into consideration the needs and the concerns of the Tamils. So out of these dialogues, always papers with recommendations for that these recommendations end up at least at the desk of the Tamil tigers, so that at least we knew they will read what came out of these dialogues. And it took exactly 2 years. And after 2 years, we suddenly got a phone call from the Tamil tigers saying, listen, we have been reading these recommendations that you are elaborating with this group. We don't necessarily agree with these recommendations, but we think that you'd really try to understand us. We want to talk to you. And after 2 years, we started working with the Tamil tigers, and for the whole process, we never ever brought the conflict parties together on a table, but we worked with each conflict party separately, trying to really generate a more critical self-reflection and not always just accusing the other side. And this is something that we also learned from Israel-Palestine after Oslo did not succeed. If you look at the whole Oslo process, as Wilfried said, you would find the liberal, moderate people having a dialogue with each other, trying to find a solution, but the potential V2 groups, Wilfried called them hardliners, I called them potential V2 groups, they were excluded from this talk, and they were in the end these people that jeopardized the whole process. So we think it's super important to reach out to these potential V2 groups, and you can't bring them on the table with the others. You need to work with them alone and separately, and you need to prepare them for a constructive dialogue. Because if you bring conflict parties, like now with Ukraine and Russia, if you bring them to the table right now, it would be just like the battlefield. They are not ready for having a meaningful dialogue. But what you can do is you can prepare them for a meaningful dialogue by working with each one separately. And I don't know, I think Mehideen, you have another question, and afterwards Nadia. Or maybe
there's also one from Kevin in the online chat about how to start a core group of local facilitators.
But I think it's important to have Nadia because she's from the field and
okay.
she's in some ways an expert now.
And actually, my question also is dealing somehow with the one which was brought into the chat. So first of all, I want to thank our reporters, to Gudrun, Oliver, Wilfried. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. It was very interesting, and it was a very structured picture of how it is going on, this being a mediator in a conflict. And actually, my question probably would be addressed to Wilfried. I wonder a little bit, as I'm right now in Ukraine, and I'm Ukrainian, and I'm interested in also in building peace and in all this story. And well, right now I'm in the process. How can I somehow involve into this? So you said that while you are building this dialogue between, for example, we take as Ukraine and Russia or some other countries, you make some workshops, and in between these workshops, you have some local these internal facilitators who somehow continue this process. So I would love to hear a little bit more about how it is organized, just how it works. Possible.
Well, we are still very much at the beginning of this process. So that means we meet regularly on the Zoom, and we try to developing this process, starting with finding participants, starting with finding the money for it. And we start to work with just very slowly via Zoom conferences. Now until now we didn't have so much contact to the Ukrainian side, but now slowly we have also more and more good contacts to the Ukrainian side. So Nadia, when you're interested, very much invited to join our group. Yeah.
Actually, yes, I think I would be interested.
Okay, good to know. Where do you live, by the way, now?
Oh, right now, 30 kilometers from the border with Russia, northern part of Kharkiv, yes. Okay. So it's not boring here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, great. Maybe we can talk to each other more in detail about this.
Yes, because I'm also planning a kind of my next steps in my career into this topic somehow. So I would love to get involved, how it works. And actually, as a theory, I would love to hear a little bit more how you see this process in future. For example, how these workshops, so workshops are in Zoom, and then in the end, these people should meet, how they are connected to government, so how these ideas you bring into the table during these discussions, how you share it with government, because anyway, peace building processes should be done on the highest level in the end, right?
Yeah. This is a process. They have to find people closer to the government, for example, or closer to they have to find journalists, professors, students, lawyers, and they have these contacts. I'm sure you have these contacts as well.
I mean, maybe we could here look at the question from Kevin. Yeah, he says, you mentioned core groups of local facilitators that work for conflict transformation and which are connected to a global network of support. The next layer of facilitators in a way. How do you build up these local core groups? Is there a set of typical steps, and do you always rely on workshops, or are there other methods too? So basically, how do we build up our networks? And I think, I mean, we have been working in this field now for 30 years, almost 30 years. And we delivered a lot of training workshops in conflict transformation all over the world. And usually what happens is that participants in this workshop get interested in the work. Yeah. And they then themselves start, you know, getting involved, asking us for support. So then we advise them. So this is, or they invite us to facilitate a dialogue for them. But this is how we usually get involved and how these core groups evolve. Yeah, it's not that we plan these kind of core groups, they evolve. Yeah, and usually they really evolve out of an existential need. Yeah, because there is so much suffering because of this violent conflict. Yeah, and there are people that want to change something. There are people that are searching for support. There are people that are looking out for theories that would explain to them a little bit what they experience in their realities. Yeah, and often to get then such a theoretical framework is really relieving for them. Yeah, because they understand, you know, these dynamics. They understand what's happening to them. They understand that they are not the only ones in the world to whom these things happen. Yeah, and that gives them then also strength, or that empowers them to get actively involved. Yeah, so I would say core groups emerge, or we don't form them.
Maria.
Yes, thank you. Good evening from Cyprus, from Nicosia. Thank you so much. I think we should have a meeting here in Cyprus, where the real conflict is, okay, going on, and next door. I have two questions. Thank you for this very ingenious, I would say, and elaborate framework. And one question is, I'm wondering whether when you do work, do you really follow it completely or parts of it, or depending on what the needs, you know, arise, who the participants are, etc. The other question is with regard to the power asymmetry. This is something that we face a lot in Cyprus. And I'm wondering, in your sort of experiences, how you deal with it, because this power asymmetry is not just majority-minority, but a whole host of other asymmetries together with it. And finally, are you doing any work now in Israel and Palestine amidst all these crises and war and pain and trauma going on? And if not, when do you think is a good point to intervene there? Thank you. But I learned a lot. And thank you, Oliver.
Yeah, you are the expert, so
because reading it was different, you know. So, thank you.
Well, you know, and this really to all of you, when you read it, it's super complex. Even our colleagues think we are too complicated or too complex, and we should reduce the complexity a little bit in order to make it more graspable.
Yeah.
We have the problem, we can't do it. You know? Yeah.
Oliver.
Do we follow our approach? Yes and no, I would say. Yeah, because I think, you know, when we are in action, when we are facilitating the dialogue as such, I think a lot of things are also intuitive. Yeah, and we go with the flow. You know, we wouldn't say, oh no, we are only now in step 1. We cannot talk about step 5 when they talk about something. Yeah, so we do it intuitively. We go with the flow, but our approach for us is super important in order to analyze afterwards what was going on in the room, what did we learn, what did we hear, what we did not hear, yeah, all these kind of things, the different facets. How does power influence the behavior even inside the room of these dialogue partners and the conflict parties? So our model helps us to analyze, to reflect, and to prepare our dialogue. And this is, and here I really would say, Wilfried and I, we have this complete in our brain. It's entrenched in our brain. Whatever information we get, we say, oh, this is related to structure, this is related to worldview, this is related to the psychobiography. The psychobiography has the influence on this behavior, yeah, which is again determined a lot by a certain structure, by a certain power asymmetry, you know, by a certain norm or value, by a certain stereotype. So not only that we are working with these 4 dimensions, but we know that these 4 dimensions are influencing each other constantly, yeah? And this is what makes often reality or conflict reality so intractable, yeah? Because it's constantly triggering this and this and this and this, yeah? So the model helps us to find probably an entry point that could help us to change a little bit perceptions, dynamics, understandings, you know. So yeah, this would be the answer to the first question if we follow our approach. But I think we are quite dogmatic sometimes also, yeah. How to deal with power asymmetry? What is important and what we really want to reflect with conflict parties? Power asymmetries, you know? The asymmetry does not only have negative Auswirkungen, impacts on the weaker conflict party, the one that is oppressed, the one that is discriminated, yeah? But power asymmetry also has a heavy toll on those who oppress and discriminate, yeah? Because in order to be able to oppress and to discriminate, you need to a certain extent, you need to dehumanize yourself, yeah? And I think this is something that is very important when you are bringing in power asymmetries and you try to reflect upon them, yeah? That when you talk about it, it's not about accusing, yeah, the ones that have more power, yeah, and having solidarity with those that are weaker, yeah, but to make those who are the powerful ones understand that they don't do a favor to themselves. Israel doesn't do a favor to itself right now, yeah, and this is very important, that to reflect together with them, yeah. So having said this, yes, we are involved in Israel-Palestine, not directly, but last week you heard the lecture of Offa Salzberg. Offa is heavily engaged in what I would say, and also colleagues from Palestine, also colleagues from Lebanon. They are all heavily engaged in, I would say, conflict management right now, means trying to avoid further escalations, yeah. And as I'm not doing the work myself, but they are doing it, I dare to say that it is really thanks to this team that we didn't see major escalations during Ramadan at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, at the Holy Esplanade, Temple Mount, yeah, because I think they did an excellent job there, yeah. Trying to prevent the escalation of violence. There is some involvement with regard to the prisoner exchange, which has not been so successful yet. But right now, I think everybody is simply busy with conflict management and not with finding solutions. Yeah. And Wilfried, you would like to add something?
Yeah, maybe. Yes, we have such a kind of core group in Israel-Palestine since many years now. And I'm really, really proud that this group survived the events of October 7, and they would work. They work now, although it's completely. It would be very understandable if the group breaks down at this moment, but it does not happen. So, linked to this question of power asymmetry, Maria, a way to do it is to try to come out with a joint conflict analysis in the core group between the inside mediators. So at least on the level of the inside mediators or inside facilitators, they should acknowledge the power asymmetries between them. On the other hand, they should also acknowledge the differences about this power asymmetry analysis between them. Because, for example, in Israel-Palestine, the secular people would clearly say Palestinians are the weaker group and they are the oppressed. But the religious people would say, yes, but look at the whole world. They have so much support from all these Muslims from Morocco till Indonesia, and Israel is a very, very small country, very much threatened by the whole world. So they have very different analyses of power asymmetries, and you have to negotiate this different analysis between them. And here, our approach of worldviews and worldviews analysis is very helpful. Okay, I'm done. Who's next?
Who is next? More questions? Or Oliver, would you like to add something to what has been discussed until now from a more theoretical perspective also? Or from your practical perspective, because also Oliver has lived in Israel and Palestine for many years. So
Oliver and also Eva Czermak, who is here, they are just very engaged in our Ukraine-Russian project, or preparatory project, I would say.
Maybe just two quick comments. So on this issue that was discussed already, kind of what if one side doesn't want to engage in talk? What we also do, like in the Ukraine-Russia context, is we had that on the one slide, and Gudrun mentioned it. Kind of for Sri Lanka, what you try to do is engage in intra-group dialogue and inter-group coordination. So we're in contact with these Ukrainian mediators, kind of as an in-between, and with a kind of more Russian-focused civil society representatives. And one kind of trick here, if you will, just to keep the discussion going, and Wilfried is really brilliant at that, is like engage in kind of publication and writing activities, kind of to kind of attract either people that kind of want to contradict you, and then you can start a dialogue with them, or people that are interested. So that's an interesting point. On just to add to the asymmetry issue that Maria raised, which is obviously quite a complex thing. So funny enough, just I mentioned these assessment and evaluation activities, and obviously we're looking also from the data we have from Kalman's activities on conflict asymmetry. Kind of analyzing language analyzing processes from a group perspective, you know, kind of comparing the Israeli with the Palestinians, and just this afternoon, you know, kind of I looked again at the data, at some initial data, and, you know, kind of started up writing. There's, from a theory, you know, just to cement my reputation as the theory guy, there's some very interesting literature by John Dixon and Kevin Durkheim on how to handle, you know, kind of loosely linked to the needs-based model, Nadler and Schnabel, you know, on how to handle power asymmetries and what to focus on in conflict dialogue. I can send one or two references to you, Maria.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I see Rebecca, please.
Hello, and thank you, first of all, for your all your insights you shared. I have actually two questions, and maybe you touched upon them already a little bit. So sorry for if it's a little bit of a repetition, but I would like to ask how you can prevent that the discussions which have happened in the core group remains isolated there. Because it's maybe not spread with society, or it's not understood by a broader society who didn't take part actually in this dialogue formats. And the second question would be a connection between the workshops as with the theoretical framework. So how, Wilfried, you mentioned earlier how to deal with hardliners, but if you really have people who are jeopardizing the dialogue formats, really try work against you, and still in this kind of framework, how can you deal with that?
Thank you very much. Who would like to take it up? The first one is with regard to how to transfer it to society. You want to take it up, Wilfried, or should I take it up?
I think, Gudrun, you should take it up.
I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. I'm the one who is supposed to moderate. Okay, so basically, in general, you know, there is always, I would say, this tension between confidentiality and then impact on the society. So this transfer question, how do you bring it from a small group of people to a broader societal discourse? Yeah. Some settings, especially when the situation is very escalated, you need a lot of confidentiality, and you don't want the information even to go out. Like now with Israel-Palestine, whatever is done right now with regard to dialogue is highly confidential. Yeah. But when you are more like in a situation like it was in Sri Lanka with regard, there is an official peace process, yeah, how to bring it to the society depends. There are many different means, yeah. Like, for example, in this Sri Lanka dialogue group, we had the 3 editors of the biggest newspapers of Sri Lanka. So by bringing these editors into the group, we already knew that this makes it into the newspapers, into the daily newspapers. So this was between 2000 to 2009, as I said. At that time, social media was not yet so present. So today, I think, for example, social media plays a very important role and is something that we did not yet really explore, also when it comes to peace building. Yeah, not only to have social influencers, but we would need peace building influencers. Yeah, and what does this mean? Because I think this is basically the media of the younger people. And what we see often in our work is we are sitting together, you know, with our generation. Yeah. And it's often even difficult for us to approach younger people. Yeah. So here definitely we need to learn more and we need to put more efforts into it. But in general, you use media campaigns, advocacy, you talk to the diplomatic community in this country to spread their ideas. So basically you target multipliers on one hand, and on the other hand, you try to influence the public discourse by newspapers, by TV, interviews, and so on, or social media. And now, Wilfried, you want to add?
Yes, I want to like to add here that we didn't work only in the global south, but we mentioned Sri Lanka, Middle East, but also Central Europe,
Yeah.
and it starts with Ukraine and Russia, but also with the Alps-Adria region. We proposed to build the Alps-Adria region into a peace region. Especially our colleague Werner Wintersteiner, who is here, is working on this approach since many, many years. And we, Gudrun and myself, we were working in the mediation process between the conflict about the bilingual science in Carinthia. We were working on a dialogue between the majority German-speaking majority and the Slovenian-speaking minority. In this conflict, I would say we were very successful. We could really influence the official negotiation process there by a track two dialogue process over 10 years. We could really influence the outcome. It was still not an ideal compromise. But it was a compromise good enough, I would say, for all conflict parties. And we could really prove that it is possible to influence official negotiations and to help preparing official negotiations. But what we did not, where we're not successful in the same conflict, is to work with all conflict parties in a more symmetrical way, because there was a lot of contradictions within each conflict party, especially between the Slovenian-speaking conflict party, the minority. They have 3 organizations for representing the Slovenian minority, and they had a lot of conflicts. And we did not manage, at the end, we did not manage to solve the conflict between the Slovenian organizations. We were successful to effect the official negotiations, but we did not solve the deeper conflicts between the Slovenian minority organizations itself. So this is how it.
This, I think, is a very important point, that no conflict party is homogeneous. Yeah. Which brings us to your other question, Rebecca. I mean, what do you do with people who really want to jeopardize everything? Yeah.
Just to add, Gudrun, Jürgen Birker is also here. He wrote a wonderful dissertation about our work and our methodology in this case of Carinthia and Slovenia. Maybe he could also add something to this discussion. But yeah.
Just to finish this one point, you know, what do you do if really somebody is jeopardizing everything? I mean, remember one of the first slides that Oliver showed you. I mean, when we have a dialogue setting, we are really working in this upper right dimension, which is about the interaction. Yeah. Interactive conflict transformation. So we usually don't have more than 14, 15 selected people in the room in order to have a meaningful dialogue. Yeah. So it's not that we are having a dialogue with the whole society and hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah. So what happens often is, and often it's really, you know, you would discuss a certain text over hours, and every word, yeah, is important, and every phrasing is important, and you work for hours, and you have the feeling you are close to an agreement, yeah. Probably only one paragraph is missing, and then they would agree on something, yeah. And then you have one person getting up, destroying everything, yeah. It always annoys me. I'm always very upset then when Wilfried, who is usually in the room, tells me I should go to the toilet and I should relax and I should take a deep breath. And the person that destroyed everything, I should hug this person in my imagination. Yeah. And I'm always upset with that. I don't want to hug this person, not even in my imagination. Yeah. But then I go, you know, I go to the restaurants, I calm down, I imagine to hug this person, I come back to the room. First of all, immediately the atmosphere is changing because I changed my attitude. Second of all, what is very important is it's not this person. Yeah, it's a general resistance to something what we simply didn't see and what we didn't pay attention to. It's not this person. If this person would not have gone up and stood up and would have destroyed everything, somebody else would have done it. So that means you need to depersonalize all this, yeah, and then you go and you start again in a very constructive way, yeah. So this is, but you need to see it as a kind of the system is correcting you because you didn't see something, yeah, and you didn't pay attention to something. It's never the person or that the person is evil or destructive or whatsoever. I think this is very important when you're doing this kind of work to somehow generate this kind of attitude, although it's very difficult, at least for me sometimes. And now back to you, Wilfried.
No, just yes, especially in the conflict in Carinthia, Werner knows about this as well, and Jürgen. We had strong critics from the field, especially including the University of Klagenfurt, against our work of dialogue, because there are enemies of dialogue, and people, they don't think it's the right time to have this dialogue, and maybe they have also right points to have these critics, but the critics was very severe. So, for example, we get Vorwurf. What means Vorwurf? We get
accusations.
Accusation that we are supporting right-wing and right extremists in Carinthia. And when this is in your own country, it's very, very painful to get such accusations. I can deal with this with such accusations in Sri Lanka and in Israel, and we work there with quite mean people, quite highly nationalistic, chauvinistic, fascist people as well. But when you do this in Austria and you get such accusations in Austria, this is really hard, and you need some kind of supervision and therapy for this kind of work then.
Yeah.
And also in the Ukraine, Russia, we were presenting, Werner and myself, we were presenting a book about Edgar Morin, about the war in the Ukraine. We translated this book from Edgar Morin into German. Werner did it more or less. And we presented this book, and we get very, very strange accusations from Ukrainian women, a lawyer, just saying we are just supporting Putin's narrative. For this, very painful to get such accusations. But this happens when you start this kind of work. You have to be very much prepared that you will get very mean accusations.
And it's not over.
And it's not
continuous.
Over.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in a highly escalated conflict, what happens is there is only black and white. Yeah, nuances disappear. And either you are with me or you are against me. Yeah, so you have this kind of dichotomy and this dualistic thinking that is prevailing in these highly escalated conflict situations. We see it everywhere. To be honest, it's just the same which culture, just the same which religion in highly escalated conflict when you are fighting the other. Yeah, it's only two. You reduce everything to two. And then we are coming, you know, and we try to basically, we come with the third position. Yeah. Our aim is to get away again from the dichotomy, you know, to make the picture again and the image more nuanced. And this is why we think that complex conflict analysis is so important, because it brings back again the nuances and goes away from dichotomy. But when you come with such an attitude, you're probably accused from both sides to support the other side. Yeah, because there is only the either or. So this would be the first challenge that you need to overcome. And this is what I said. This is why, you know, you look then for people who are critical towards their own society. Yeah. And I think this is something that is also really so difficult in these escalated conflict situations. It doesn't allow you anymore to be self-critical. Yeah. In these situations, you always accuse the other side, and whatever happens, it's only the other side. Because if you would be critical towards yourself, and if you would say, we made also a mistake, it means that you show some kind of weakness as a first initial step, and you cannot afford to show this kind of weakness. But the problem is, if you don't reflect yourself critically and you don't reflect your own strategies, it on the medium and longer run, it's weakening you even more. Yeah.
I think we're more or less at the end, no, Gudrun?
Yeah, we still have 4 minutes, but I think we can round it up. I was just like so.
I would like to.
I don't know how to finish.
I would like to say something.
Thanks.
Before I see Tamra person, this tree here is with us.
Yes, Tamra.
I saw her only now, and just I will use this opportunity to say to Tamra that I'm so proud of the work you did with editing this book. And I'm so happy that it's done and that it's out and that we have now these first meetings and discussions about this book. I'm really grateful to you.
Yes.
For kind of, I know how difficult.
How difficult it was. Yes.
But at the end you managed, and I'm really happy about this. Thank you so much, Tamra.
Yes.
I will try to come to Graz end of June, but I'm not sure if I really managed to come from Sarajevo. But if not, I use the opportunity to say my thanks to you now here, face to face.
Thank you. Thank you for everything that you all did. And this has been a wonderful session. I know we didn't get to hear from Jürgen so much at the end, but we will get to hear from him soon. So.
Yes. If I pick up, we will hear from me next time, because next time we will talk about Austria, and this brings us to what Wilfried was talking about in the end. I think today we learned a lot about a very elaborate theoretical approach to conflict transformation on the one hand, but on the other hand also gained a lot of insights to your practical experience in your work on the ground. On the other hand, you shifted geographically today from Sri Lanka to Israel-Palestine to Austria, where we will continue next time. And next time we will also shift the focus a little bit, because we will talk not so much about dealing with current conflicts, but dealing with troubled past and using and applying the approach that you elaborated on today to situations where you have to deal with narratives and identities and also minority protection. And we will move a bit closer to Graz. We will move to Central Europe. So thank you very much, and we will see each other next Monday. Have a good evening.